working in Madrid in the Spanish National Center for Cardiovascular Research, and also I'm doing clinical cardiology in the University Hospital Fundación Jiménez Díaz. And we are going to be talking today about imaging in cardio-oncology, and mostly related to a major project that is being undertaken in Europe, which is called the Resilience Project. I have the privilege of counting with three prominent investigators from the Resilience trial. To my right, first I have Andrea Moreno. She's a cardiologist expert in imaging. Then we have Devesa. She's also a cardiologist from CNIC. She's group leader, and also she's an expert in imaging. We have a round table which is on imaging. And then we have Javier Sánchez, who is a physicist, a researcher focused on the physics and engineering. He's working for Philips, and he's the principal investigator from our technology partner within the Resilience, which is Philips. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
So just as a very quick introduction, I'm going just to briefly summarize what is Resilience, what is the project about, and then we'll come directly into the issue of imaging of cardio-oncology. So as you know, every year, more than 4 million Europeans are diagnosed with a new cancer, and 75% of them will survive cancer receiving anthracyclines. We know that anthracyclines, they have high cardiotoxic potential, and in fact, it is well known that around 1/3 of patients surviving cancer receiving anthracyclines develop some sort of cardiotoxicity. It is, in not all of them is something that is clinically relevant, but up to 5 to 10%, this cardiotoxicity is in the form of chronic heart failure. Therefore, it is estimated that around 1 million Europeans, cancer survivors, they live with chronic heart failure. The Resilience Project is a project that aims to develop a novel intervention trying to prevent the development of anthracycline-induced cardiotoxicity. We are going to be talking about this intervention, which is remote ischemic conditioning, and the main tool we are using to evaluate not only the effect of this intervention on patients, but also the composition and the function of the heart of these patients is magnetic resonance imaging. So this is going to be the main topic of today. Resilience is a project that is funded by the European Commission, which is coordinated by the Spanish National Center for Cardiovascular Research in Madrid, and we count with the participation of 13 institutions across 6 European countries. Also, the European Society of Cardiology is partner, and our technological partner, as mentioned before, is Philips. So first of all, I would like that, Andrea, maybe you can briefly summarize what is the global scheme of the Resilience and what is the imaging protocol that we're implementing in Resilience.
Thank you, Borja. So just to summarize the CMR protocol in Resilience, we perform 3 scans, CMR scans, in all centers in Europe, across Europe, recruiting patients in 3 different time points. The first one is a baseline before patients take the first chemotherapy dose. The second is an intermediate CMR during the treatment, and the last one is 9 weeks after the last chemotherapy. So there are 3 different scans, and the key of sequences of these protocols, we have seen imaging because we want to know the global function, or the global cardiac function, the late gadolinium enhancement to detect myocardial fibrosis, tagging and the novel strain sequences, because we want to know how is the regional contractility or the strain. Also, the protocol includes T1 mapping to know the diffuse fibrosis, T2 edema. We can know if there is any myocardial edema too. And also we include quantitative perfusion. Is one of the techniques, in the main important techniques in this trial to explore in this project. So, in summarize, we have a really complete picture when we can also measure function, characterization, tissue characterization. We can also evaluate mechanics, how is the strain, and the perfusion too. So it's a really complete protocol in this trial.
Thank you very much. So just to summarize, so the aim of the project or the trial is to enroll 600 patients. All of them undergo this comprehensive imaging
Yes.
protocol. So therefore, this is going to be one of the widest data set for patients undergoing chemotherapy, randomized in a trial, and prospective enrolling this imaging data, right?
Right. Yes, it's the largest CMR data set in all clinical in cardio-oncology that is already exists in this moment. So it's a great trial to know what happened in this context, in this field.
Thank you very much. So before we will come back later to see what is the status of the trial,
Okay.
but you have mentioned that in resilience, it is also measured what is perfusion of the heart, quantitative perfusion. And I would like to ask Anna, because you are an expert in also the interaction between metabolic disorders and microcirculation, mostly identified by imaging. Can you tell us a little bit about the sequence that can quantify cardiac perfusion? What is the prognostic value of cardiac or perfusion or microcirculation damage? So why is perfusion so important for this kind of patients?
So, thank you, Borja. So, quantitative perfusion is a very important tool nowadays for evaluating microcirculation. It really gives us the status of microcirculation even in very early stages of disease. And it has been extensively compared with the gold standard, which is invasive angiography, in several studies. So we have also used quantitative perfusion to evaluate microcirculation even in asymptomatic populations. So we have an example of in the PESA cohort in CNIC, in CNIC, in which we included around 500 participants, healthy volunteers, and we saw that the exposure to cardiometabolic risk factors was associated to a decline or a dysfunction in microcirculation. And this was, we could measure microcirculation in a very accurate manner. So this is for the general population. So what happens with the cardiotoxicity? So our group has also shown that in preclinical models of cardiotoxicity, even low cumulative doses of anthracyclines produce an alteration of microcirculation, which can also be measured by quantitative perfusion CMR. So this is a very useful technique for early identification of myocardial damage, and this occurs much earlier than other structural or functional abnormalities, such as decrease in left ventricular ejection fraction. So this is a much earlier marker. So this has not been proven in humans though. So resilience is going to use this technique, this quantitative perfusion mapping, in order to evaluate whether this could be a new imaging biomarker for early identification of participants at risk, of patients at risk of developing cardiotoxicity.
So this is extremely interesting because you have shown that you have demonstrated in a cohort of healthy volunteers that damage in the microcirculation as evaluated by magnetic resonance imaging is associated with risk factors, a potential with prognosis. And now also you are telling that in your animal models, anthracyclines induce damage in the microcirculation that you can visualize by imaging. So because one of the paradoxes in the cardio-oncology is that despite patients, they survive cancer and they have a complete normal cardiac function, but still these patients, they are at least 2 times higher risk for developing cardiovascular events. So do you think that eventually having this hidden damage into the microcirculation might explain this increased risk in this population?
I certainly think so. So we also demonstrated in PESA that alteration of microcirculation could predict development of atherosclerosis. In this case, because these were healthy volunteers, this was subclinical atherosclerosis, but it's very likely that they will develop clinical disease in the future, particularly in the cardiotoxicity context.
That's great. So we have heard from Andrea that we are doing a lot of different sequences to measure different things. And you have mentioned also that we are measuring thin imaging, which is the classical way in which we are measuring the contraction of the heart. But also, we are developing a new ways of performing thin imaging. So this is what I would like to ask Javier. I would like just to make a very quick introduction that one of the main problems for magnetic resonance imaging to be implemented is the long time required. So this is why, in fact, you came up with an idea on how we can significantly reduce the time of a scan for DNA imaging. Yeah. Can you please explain, first of all, which was the rationale for developing this new sequence, and then if you can explain in lay words, what is this new sequence about?
Sure, thank you, Borja. Yeah, well, as you can see also during the discussion, so CMR is a very powerful tool that is able to assess edema, it can assess microcirculation damage on the top of function, but it's still seen as a very complex technique. So also not only for the acquisition and interpretation, but also for technicians to be trained. So there is a need also to streamline the acquisition of this technique, of the thin images, for example, and then to make more not dependent on the technician. So if you can do everything in one sequence, in one single sequence, in one breath hold, it will simplify the whole process to acquire cardiac signal. And this is still one of the main, ejection fraction is still one of the key markers to assess, which is the cardiotoxicity. So I think resilience is a perfect project to show that these kind of approaches can be helpful.
So before you explain this sequence, so just to, because...
I can go in details if you want.
No, but before you explain, I think you have said that eventually you can acquire thin imaging in one single breath hold.
Yeah.
So eventually you can elaborate a little bit more. Yeah, so you can acquire the entire function of the heart in only one breath hold in 20 seconds?
Exactly. So, if you look at a thin organs and the breath hold conditions, so you look at the image, so most of the image is quiet. So it's just the heart which is beating inside and some other organs. So if you can be focused just on those regions that are beating or are moving or are changing the signal through the cardiac cycle, then there is a lot of redundancy in the information of the image. So the idea for the sequence that we have co-developed with ESOS, it's that, just be focused on the things that are moving and then don't be acquiring repeatedly the things that are quiet. So just those ones are quiet ones, and then just be focused on the dynamic regions. It's a bit more complex than this, how we are doing, because, you don't know in advance which is static and which is dynamic, no? But, we find a way to be able to recognize those regions and to simplify. And then allows you to go to one step further. So if you look in 2D, it could be nice. But if you think in 3D, that is what we are doing now, you can even accelerate even higher. So that allows us to acquire a whole thin 3D with isotropic resolution that you can do different MPRs like you are doing with the CT in one single breath hold. So we streamline the acquisition of the whole thing. You just plan a whole volume that is covering the whole thorax in a coronary acquisition. Just press, hold the breath, acquire, and then you have all the information that you need in order to be able to assess the ejection fraction of the patient.
Because this is like science fiction, so you are going to be able to perform an MRI within less than 1 minute.
It's a breath hold.
one single breath, which is 20 seconds. 20. But what about delay enhancement? Because most of the times our patients, regularly we measure not only function, but also we're interested in seeing whether they have some sort of fibrosis.
We were also working and also in technology to be able to do a 3D LGE acquisition with isotropic resolution, the same concept that we do with ESOS, in order to just in one single and additional one single breath hold scan, you can do also a 3D volume that you can do MPRs, and we published these results already in a wider cohort with ischemic heart diseases and myocarditis, all type of the diseases that it was published in 2021, where we demonstrate that the ejection fraction and the scar measurement that we measure are correlated also with the conventional 2D sequences.
You are presenting this very humble, but I guess that you will all agree that this is something that will revolutionize. So eventually this was to be used in the daily practice. Eventually, rather than doing one CMR scan in 1 hour, we are going to be able to do maybe 5 or 6 CMR scans in 1 hour.
Well, we also need to take into account which is the clearance time between the injection of the contrast and late gadolinium enhancement. So we also demonstrate that you can do a very simple MR scan in less than 15 minutes.
Well, and I think that most of the audience, I think they are going to be interested to see whether they can use this technology. So is this something that is clinically available these days, or what is the pipeline for this?
Well, it's still a research tool that we are still under evaluation what to do next. But yeah, could be.
I'm pushing him too much because we want this to become a real product and we want to make this in front of you so he cannot escape from this. Yeah. So hopefully within the resilience project we are going to be able to demonstrate that these sequences actually work. For the project itself, this is something that is to be proven that we can acquire the same information, but then after we finish in this, if this is correct and this is then become available clinically for worldwide, this is going to be a revolution for cardiac imaging, so this is fantastic. I hope so. We'll come back to the role of Philips later. So Andrea, maybe, but this project started in the year 2021, the resilience. As we mentioned before, we are planning to enroll 600 patients at high risk for cardiotoxicity in 6 different European countries. So how this is working? Who is analyzing all these images and what is the status of the project? Is this far advanced? Is this early project? Can you update us?
So at this point, we have recruited nearly 400 patients and close to 1,000 CMR scans have already sent us to the core lab at CNIC and have been analyzed. So once again, I want to highlight this is the most clinical trial with the largest CMR data set at this moment. So it's really huge. And all this imaging, we have the expertise concentrated at the CNIC. So all of us, we analyzed all these CMRs to conclude.
So you said so far enrolled 400 patients. The protocol is 3 MRIs, so one before treatment with anthracyclines, another one halfway, and another one 2 months after finishing. So this means that you have already generated more than 1,000 CMR scans in this protocol?
At this moment, closely, like I said before, closely 1,000 scans we have already at the server of the CNIC. So for 600 patients, that will be the goal of this trial, maybe more than 1,200 scans will be analyzed in this CNIC. So it's a huge project, really.
So this is going to be a massive information, not only to prove whether this intervention at this remote condition, and we'll talk later about it, works and protects this population, but also this can help a lot in the development of new markers, imaging markers, who can identify which patients will develop cardiotoxicity, right? Are you planning to also to test whether there are some early markers predicting cardiotoxicity within these images acquired?
About new markers?
Early markers, like T2
any markers with this, of course, indeed, some of these sequences are developed at the CNIC. So the target in this trial is to find these new markers, imaging markers, to avoid the failure in these kind of populations. No? So we are waiting for these results that it will be very hopeful for the next maybe guidelines in cardio-oncology's field.
Because I think that this is extremely important, because we all would agree that CMR or MRI is the best technique, but we cannot apply this to all the patients receiving anthracyclines. So therefore, if you can identify which patients will really develop this cardiotoxicity, this might help in the selection of patients undergoing MRI, right?
Yes, right. This is the point of this, to find the perfect time to know, or to find these early markers and do something before something happens with this patient, because anthracyclines induce cardiotoxicity. For today, even it is really a problem. Maybe 30% of the patient can have any kind of problem. So this is a really good point in this trial to find out.
So we are in a cardiology congress, so we like imaging, but this is more than imaging. So Anna, as Andrea, you are a clinical cardiologist as well. So can you give us what is the broader impact of resilience besides this imaging? What is the broader impact of resilience can have in the cardio-oncology community?
Yes, of course. So if the trial proves positive, it will validate a non-invasive, non-expensive therapy, which is the remote ischemic conditioning, as a cardioprotective strategy in cardio-oncology. So remote ischemic conditioning in resilience is done in a very, I would say, simple, I don't know if it's the right word, manner, but it's just using a blood pressure cuff in the arm. So this sends remote signals to the heart, so it helps protecting, it might help protecting the effects of cardiotoxicity. However, as you have been discussing, this is not the only point of the trial. So with more than 1,000 CMRs and also serial CMRs on the same patients, all of them undergoing the same exact protocol, this will be the an unprecedented imaging data set that will be used for probably for also following the evolution of cardiotoxicity from the very early stages to the late stages, and allowing us to identify, as Andrea was saying, new imaging biomarkers, T2 mapping, myocardial perfusion, and also maybe allowing us to redefine how to detect and monitor these cardiotoxicity patients at risk.
So you mentioned that remote ischemic conditioning is done by a regular blood pressure cuff. So just for the audience that maybe they are not familiar with this intervention that has been tested in other conditions like myocardial infarction or stroke. And this is something that has been tested in experimental models, and it's clearly shown that it's protective. And this intervention is done by generating ischemia in a remote organ. This is why it's called remote ischemic conditioning. Eventually by occluding the circulation in the arm by a blood pressure cuff that remain inflated for 5 minutes, generating ischemia in the arm. Then this is reperfused, so the blood pressure is turned off, allowing reperfusion, and this is repeated for 3 times. And therefore, this is releasing some markers from the intermittent ischemic arm into the heart. And what is really beautiful about this project is that eventually this remote conditioning has been proven very beneficial in animal models of myocardial infarction or stroke, but in the clinical arena, the results have been mixed. And the main reason for this is that in the experimental level, you can do the remote conditioning before myocardial infarction or stroke, because this is a model, but in humans, they present when they have already an ongoing myocardial infarction or stroke. So this is why the results have been mixed. However, in cardio-oncology and in anthracycline-induced cardiotoxicity, since you know exactly when the patient is going to receive the injection of anthracyclines, it's pretty easy to program that patients receive this remote ischemic conditioning before each of these interventions. So Anna, are you confident that if these results are positive, this will be incorporated into the clinical guidelines? So how are the patients doing with doing the remote conditioning themselves?
So I think this is as I was saying, very easy technique to implement by patients. So they just receive a brief training, and that is very non-expensive, it's non-invasive. So I think if the trial proves positive, we should really consider the implementation, and I think it's feasible to do. Yes, completely.
This is great, because there are no, maybe statins which have shown the STOP-CA trial that they can protect, but the statins more or less is widespread use to prevent cardiovascular events. But in the case that we identify a novel therapy, this might help these patients, which are a huge population, as we mentioned, receiving anthracyclines every year. And now we are coming to the end, but I have one tough question for you, Javier. So you are a scientist, but you work for Philips, which is our industrial partner. And people might wonder what is doing an industry which, in the end, you are meant to be selling equipment to make money for the company. So why are you involved in this kind of academic trial? So what is the real role of Philips within this resilience trial?
Well, I mean, there are a few. I would say that also we are very committed also to prevention. So I think that all the health is moving for acute events to prevention things. So I think that we are partnering with key opinion leaders and with key sites, as is the Spanish National Center for Cardiovascular Research, in order to explore what are those spaces and where we can help on that, and also to understand what is the care cycle of the disease and where we can put solutions that helps on that in collaboration with you. I think It's on the top of the providing the tools to be able to show which are the key biomarker imaging markers that allows us to predict earlier the disease, or also to identify which are the patients that who are more risk. I think that is also to understand better how the workflow of the patient is in this case for the cardiotoxicity, but we are working on many other different projects that there is no time for highlighting here, but it's to understand exactly where we have to put solutions and how we can collaborate in order to make prevention a success.
So this is great. So I think resilience is one of these examples in which there are different stakeholders in the process that are collaborating together. So we are a cardiologist, we like imaging, we have also the industry, we have hematologists and oncologists because they are treating the patients who develop cancer. Also we have the collaboration from patients themselves because they are participating very actively. And also I think it's also important to highlight that the European Society of Cardiology is taking a critical role in the resilience project. The European Society of Cardiology is helping a lot, not only having all the different stakeholders together, but also in helping in dissemination activities of the project, because it's extremely important not only to do things that help patients, but also to advocate this to the general cardiology community and even to the general population. So I think that is a very good example of collaboration of different stakeholders. So I think we are coming to an end. We have spent almost half an hour, which has been great. I really thank you for being here with us. In fact, you are those who are leading this trial, and hopefully this will come to a good end, which means that we are going to be able to improve the life of patients. So we would like to thank you for attending this ESC TV from the Resilience Project, and hopefully next year we are going to be able to provide some more information about eventually some partial results of resilience. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.